Hi, everyone. Dennis Foley from Acoustic Fields. Today we're here with Steven. Steven's done a lot of, well, not a lot, but he's been our first recording engineer that we've had in Sacred Ground. So he's been through a couple sessions with us, and I just thought it would be a great idea if a professional person who's done the recording could talk a little bit to you about some of the things he's discovered in the room, maybe during the recording process, and I think more importantly, based on Steven's and I's discussion afterwards during the mixing process. So just go ahead and tell us what you heard.
Well, I think the two things that stand out the most was the dimension of the recordings and really the vocals. It was very easy to mix in general. When we did our session, we did a live setting. There was an organ, drummer, bass player, a vocalist, sax, and guitar. And everything was very spacious and separated without trying too hard. And I think in most situations, I would be anticipating a lot of bleed, and that in most cases would be bad. But it was actually it was a joy to mix because everything sat in its own little pocket. It had depth without being too, I guess, stuck together, clunky. And there wasn't a lot of problem frequencies for me in general. The vocals were just so easy to just find the mix, and everything really had its own space. And I just found myself automating volume with little or no EQ or compression at all. And I just did 2 mixes in a couple hours, and they weren't finalized, but they were very good indications of what the room could actually do.
Well, we get this, this is the 3rd or 4th time I've heard this regarding vocals. And I think it's a direct result of our foam technology, because I spent 8 years getting those curves right. And when you get them right, this is what happens. The end result, not only in the playback mode, but in the recording mode. And obviously we want to make sure that both playback and recording modes translate. So, Steven's telling us again what we've heard. A lot of engineers are saying, I don't hit it with reverb, I don't hit it with delay right out of the gate.
Absolutely, yeah.
It stays pure longer in the chain, if I do anything to it at all.
Yeah, just for style, basically. As soon as I we used a Bronner VM stereo tube mic, which is amazing. When that microphone was off, there was a huge loss in the recording. There was something missing. And then as soon as you put that stereo mic for the room on, it just got big and huge in stereo. So it was really great. I mean, the low one was great too, but I remember the vocals just being very natural sounding. We ended up using Gefell M300 small condenser mics, so there was a little bit of isolation, but again, nothing was just jumping out of the mix. And by the way, my room is not anything, Dennis has seen it, it's not anything on a professional level. I have minimum acoustical treatment. I actually have small dimensions. I mean, you name it. But I felt confident after it was two mixed that it was presentable at the very least. So, and then low end's a whole nother story. I mean, the kick drum, I think going back, I would use different mics on the kick drum now that I'm accustomed to it. But our mic situation, we really hadn't had a test before I came in. So we really just set up with what we anticipated was a good microphone placement, and honestly it was great. I wouldn't change too much, maybe just microphones for taste, but the room is there, the space was there. I mean, the dimension is definitely there for sure.
Well, and that's the diffusion technology working, and was the goal of the room, because we have live on one end and we have playback on the other. So, and they're both under the same room acoustic. Now, live, we all know from my videos, and playback usually has different acoustical requirements, but in this room, the task was to create both. So it's kind of a unique and a novel situation, and it's good to hear Steven tell us about the things that really sound good and translate. And the stereo microphone is a good indication of how good your room sounds.
Absolutely.
You can't lie to a stereo microphone. If your room is bad, it's going to give you bad. But if your room is good, you're going to get that good representation. And did the room sound a little bit bigger than it actually physically is?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was another thing. Translation. I don't have the most professional mixing room, but I felt when I was listening in my office that I felt like I was standing in the room, which is how I recorded it as well. So what was very difficult was very easy to listen to at my house, and it translated very well with, I felt like I was standing in here. I've been here probably almost a dozen times now, and I'm getting comfortable with how it sounds. And the only thing I heard at home was my room, and the certain frequencies. So I knew what that was, but it felt like I was standing on that drum riser when I was, doing, by the way, we did a Glenn Johns technique, and it was great. The drums sounded big. I had control, panning wise. It was just really, it was a joy mixing it, honestly. And that's not something I throw around a lot. I'm never really in those situations. So,
yeah, it is. The drums did sound good. I was impressed with how they sound. They seem to sit in the mix well.
All by themselves.
Yeah, which is a really not an easy thing with drums.
Especially that technique. I love the Glenn Johns technique just because it's, very classic sounding, and that's my style of recording is Motown, soul. My reference track when I was mixing was Marvin Gaye's, Al Green, and I felt they had similar timbres and no cymbal problems at all. I thought the cymbals are going to be swimming the entire room, especially in the vocal mic. It wasn't even an issue. And usually I have to dip cymbals out of everything, and especially guitars. The first time I ever did this, I actually put one of Dennis's 2-inch, I believe.
2-inch foam.
2-inch foam directly on the grill, and I put the microphone on the other side of the foam. So basically the 2-inch was a buffer. And I did that because we used a 57, which is a great mic, but I prefer to use a 57 and a Cascade or a Royer and have that blending, but we just didn't have that option. So we put that in there. Not only did it, help the recording for noise, but it gave a taper volume, taper of the high end, almost like a ribbon. So I definitely will use that again if I don't have a ribbon in the room, because, you just take it off and it's gone. But I didn't even have to mess with guitars. I just found the volume, panned them, and they were done. No EQ, no compression.
Nice. Walk us through that miking technique for drums.
So the Glenn Johns technique, it can be very technical, but if you ever watch a video on himself, he does a lot of seminars, and he's very minimalistic. It's 3 mics, equal distance from the 3 mics to the snare. We did an RE320 electro voice on the kick drum, a D112, which is a $100 kick drum mic over the tom area, and that was about 4.5 feet, 5 feet from the snare. And then we had a really amazing ribbon mic from AEA, the 44 CE, which is a classic ribbon mic for the overhead, again 4.5 feet away. So equidistance, all 3 mics, no phase issues, everything was very balanced. The snare, there was no problem with it cutting through the mix, and I actually feel like the drums set the tone for the entire recording because of that 3 mic setup. Everything else sounded very Motown, so to speak, in their timbre. So,
and the bass, we went right into the board. The
bass, we did a DI straight in. We're using Apollo converters. I didn't touch. You can use emulations or anything, but we kept it very natural. And that's only because the bass is just so balanced in the room. The Bronner, if there's anything you were concerned with missing as far as low end, as soon as you turn the Bronner microphone on, the room just filled up with all the low end. And it was very balanced. There was no swells and dips and nulls or anything like that. It always added to the mix in a positive way, which was great.
Good. Well, everything was heard. Everything was separated. Everything was balanced. Mission accomplished, it
Absolutely.
sounds like, from my perspective. So, whew,
Yeah.
thank God for that. But, well, great. Anything else you want to add?
Vocals. I've never enjoyed mixing vocals. Usually I'm stacking things on and just minimalistic, EQ moves and compression moves, but usually there's a big chain for the vocals to stick out. I mean, if I were to go back into the session, I probably would just change automation because the vocal just sat perfectly the entire time and it led the music, which it's supposed to, but it also, there was room and space, again, dimension of the room for the other instruments to come in. And if you guys have a chance to hear the recording, the sax and the guitar it's as if they were like married. They just played together throughout the recordings as opposed to it just being two separate signals and you're trying to force them to work together. The room did all the hard work, and that was fantastic for me. So,
well, that's interesting.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit more about that. What usually happens?
I have a hard time finding panning positions when I get music that I don't record because my panning was basically our setup of the room. I put the guitar here, vocals and sax here. The drums were in the center, but when we recorded, they were back left. And then the organ was back there. But the sax and the guitar were the melody motif holders of the entire music other than the vocals. But we did it instrumental. So that was finding the spot to where their leads and their transitions kind of flowed together. It just worked immediately as opposed to fighting very hard to find where the sax is really loud and the guitars are soft. I didn't have to deal with that. I just did automation for the two, just a generic balancing. And then as I started doing just these basic automation moves, they just started gelling together on their own to where it was like, don't touch it, you might mess it up.
Right. Very nice. Well, I think we're going to have to change our signature statement. Our signature statement is listen to the music without hearing the room. I think it's going to have to be listen to the music and the room.
The room was my friend in this case, for sure.
Yeah, when you're doing live recording. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity.